Motherhood, for me, has been the single most powerful tool of self-actualization in my life. Once you love your own children, you love all children. Mothers will crawl over broken glass to protect their children.
We need to stop acting like mothers are weak.
It's one of the most beautiful gifts in the world to see your husband fall in love with the baby you've just given birth to, and to see siblings and their love develop between them.
A conservative feminist is a woman who
leans into motherhood and femininity and protects childhood.
I need to make a confession. I am a feminist. I am even such a feminist that when I was a student, I was a women's rights youth lobbyist. Yes, that's right. I actually handed over petitions advocating for women's rights on very high-level politicians and policy makers and organizations, because I felt always that I had to be grateful for the fact that I got to grow up in the Netherlands and that I got to go to school and pursue my passions and my dreams. And I never could really fathom why women in other parts of the world maybe could not have those opportunities, had to stop school because they were married up because their families were so poor they couldn't educate them, so it was cheaper to marry them off. And what we see in these cases when they have a poor family is that they rather send the boys to school than to girls. I wanted these girls to have opportunities to pursue their dreams, because that's what for me was it all about. Being able to fulfill who you are, having equal opportunities, not equal outcomes. I am proud to be a feminist, but we need to talk about the word feminism, because in the recent decades, that word has lost its meaning and has been taken completely over by the left as a sort of a political tool where the man is seen as a suppressor. We all need to hate the patriarchy and women need to be liberated. But is that really what feminism is about? We are demanding now by law that women are even getting more favorable outcomes. Well, that was never the whole goal about feminism. So we need to go back to the beginning and we need to come up with a new concept. A conservative feminist. Because even though these words might not seem to collide, it was actually the conservatives who started the feminist movement. Now, I am so proud to welcome our guest for today, Laoisa De Brún. She's a barrister, a mother, an advocate for families, for women, for LGBTs, and she's also an independent candidate in Ireland. Laoisa, thank you so much for being here. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, it's great to see you again, Scarlett, and thank you for having me on as one of your earlier guests on your new channel. I'm delighted to see it. It's a great initiative. As you said, I'm a barrister. I'm actually also IBCLC, which is an international board certified lactation consultant. And prior to that, I was a broadcast journalist. So I'm trained and qualified in 3 professions, but the IBCLC part would inform my advocacy for mothers and for motherhood in the culture and in law. It informs my advocacy against surrogacy. So I campaign along various different issues from gender. I found it the only organisation in Ireland that pushes back against gender ideology with regard to women's rights and child protection. But I also campaign against surrogacy, and more recently I'm moving into the area of immigration, but always from the lens of protecting women's rights. So yes, like you, I've come up through very much a feminist theoretical framework, and that would still be the lens in how I view things. But I would say that, I always was uncomfortable with how feminism was silent on motherhood. That was the missing piece. It was either silent or it saw motherhood as oppression. And I think that's just a fatal flaw really in the argument.
This is very interesting because when we had a call, we were having a discussion, how we're going to talk about our podcast. And one thing that you said is, I am a conservative feminist. Now, let's really start by the beginning, because I think this word has been used so often that we have stopped asking what the definition is. What for you does feminism mean? Does that word even have still relevance and meaning in today? And how should we redefine it?
So what I've noticed is on the right, there's a real allergy to the word feminism because they view feminism as liberal feminism. So liberal feminism is essentially individualistic. There's no class analysis at all. And it says things like, if you want to be a prostitute or, have an account on OnlyFans or strip, do what you want. It's all empowering as long as you make money. That's not true feminism, because that's still making money out of essentially degrading yourself. But I also think that with feminism, it's really about addressing inequality. But the key thing I think that went wrong with feminism is it became so reductive. So it became about just get out and work, just be like a man, just be like a small man, to the absolute detriment of a whole generation of women. When I campaigned for no in the Irish referendum, where they were trying to remove the beautiful safeguards and recognition of mothers from our constitution, that's what struck me, was that, a mother is not a father. And even if you're working outside the home, you're still doing all that mothering in the home, running the family. So I think that has to be recognized and valued. And I think that's what has gone wrong slightly with feminism. So when I say I'm a conservative and a feminist, what I mean is I want to conserve motherhood, mothering, the family, childhood as a developmental stage characterized by innocence that we as adults must protect. Mothering as, a kind of sacred part of humanity. So I want to protect and conserve these values, these pillars that are so fundamental to us. And so if that makes me a conservative, then I am. And I had that real Damascene moment a few years ago. I just thought, gosh, I am a conservative. I kept being described as a conservative in the media here in Ireland. And I was like, whoa, I didn't think I was a conservative, but actually I think I am, in terms of what we need to conserve. But I am also a feminist, and that shocks people sometimes. How can you be both? But you can, if you define feminism in something that is good for women and girls. And for me, my experience is that motherhood for me has been the single most powerful tool of self-actualization in my life. Without becoming a mother, I wouldn't have the steel that's inside me to do all the advocacy I do against these issues, which have very powerful vested groups behind them. I think as well, once you love your own children, you love all children. And mothers will crawl over broken glass to protect their children. There's a powerful mammalian instinct there. And without that, we wouldn't have survived as a race, as mammals. So I think that nurturing that we naturally have as women due to our hormones, as much as, society, I think it's hugely enriching to lean into that. There's I don't know if you've seen this video of a girl, she's 27, I think. She's holding a newborn baby for the first time in her life. It's in England. And you can see the cascade of oxytocin. She can't stop crying. And she's crying and crying and laughing at the same time. And she's holding this baby. It's her friend's baby. And she goes, I want to take my clothes off and do skin on skin. And you just see this physical reaction. And I just thought that was beautiful, because that is nature.
Yeah.
That is nature. That is that beautiful nurturing instinct that we have. And so that's how I would see that as a central plank of my feminism, is encouraging women toward motherhood. I mean, every single time you read the statistics and how depressing they are about the birth rate, Scarlett, at the same time, I always read that 85% of people do want to become mothers.
Yeah. I want to talk about that with you a little bit later, but let's go back, because one thing that I said is that we're pushing women to be like men, like mini men. And we think that if we're pushing them to be like mini men, then you are strong, then you are empowered, whatever that word may mean. At the same time, the way you describe it, I am not a mother yet myself, but I've seen it in my friends that are mothers. I see it in you. You cannot underestimate a strength of a mother. How strong she is to defend her family, to defend her children, her baby nest. We need to stop acting like mothers are weak, because that is often a notion that we see. And what I find so worrying with this modern wave of feminism is that it has gone through the point that mothers are being actually shamed. We have women judging other women for having kids, while they are saying, oh, everyone should have equal rights, equal choices. Well, if it's your equal choice, then why are you judging someone that makes a decision to pursue their divine feminine purpose of having a family and finding self-fulfillment in that? And then even worse, saying that is a sign of weakness. But where do you think, because I think if I'm looking at the whole timeline, I've been reading into this. When we started with conservatism as a conservative wave of feminism early on, 1666, it was about having women going to school so they can be better mother and wives, because not doing it is actually a sin, because you're wasting their beautiful, precious brains. How do we go from that to the modern feminism as we see it today? Where did it go wrong?
So when you look at like the first wave of feminism, so like late 1800s, I think, motherhood is very much centered. And then as you go through, and the second wave would be 60s, 70s. And that's more about, and so the first wave really is about the suffragette movement, the vote. People aren't really aware as well that they fought for, that wave of feminists fought for public toilets to be single sex. There were no female toilets. And there was this thing called the urinary leash, which meant that if you were out shopping, you always had to be 20 minutes from your home because there was nowhere safe to go to the toilet for a woman. So the second wave was more so about consciousness raising. So it's not just that my husband's beating me up at home, but actually this is happening elsewhere. This is a thing. This is an issue. So I think that was a good thing. You know, I think it's like, people don't like the word patriarchy. It is simply a fact that there are two sexes, and one sex, unfortunately, do harass, rape, assault, attack, stalk the other sex. And I think it's really important to be honest about that and address that. And of course, not all men, but I mean, I think men need to face that. And it's not just a women's problem to solve, it's a societal problem. But I do think that whether you come at it from a strictly conservative point of view or whether you come at it from a new age, divine feminine point of view, there is a binary. Women are not men and men are not women. And I think what's missing in society is a positive role modeling and elevation of femininity and masculinity. So, you know, on the left, you'll always hear about toxic masculinity. And on the right, you'll hear about, well, we're all told we're toxic and that's what's wrong. Now, what I've just explained as a quick example in terms of rape culture, feminicide, male violence against women and girls, they are examples of toxic masculinity. And if we pretend they're sweep them under the carpet or ignore the elephant in the room, that's not helpful. But this is what I think is really important. We need to own that, face it, but then we need to talk about what is positive masculinity. Because I think we need it more than ever. And positive masculinity, I think, is the conservative model of procreate, protect, provide. And honestly, I'm certain that there isn't a woman in the world that doesn't want a man to do those three things, whether they're left or right. And I think that's the real missing piece. Like, I think there are plenty of young women, they may not see themselves as conservative. They wouldn't possibly even hate that definition, but they would love to stay home and have 3 or 4 children and be provided for. And then, as you say, it's still important to use your God-given brains, your talents, and to self-actualize intellectually as well. But what I feel is that by driving women on this career trajectory, which is completely identical to men's, they're missing the biological window. I have 3 daughters, and honestly, I say to them, get all your education and try and meet someone in college and try and have your first baby before you're 30. That should be your goal, because life is long. Life is long. And and I think as a woman, you know, you often come into your power at 40.
Yeah.
So there's no need to kind of delay everything until your late 30s. But in terms of the masculinity, femininity, I think on the left and in feminism generally, there's a fear of talking about femininity, talking about motherhood, talking about these archetypal aspects of the female experience. And likewise, there's in society, which is increasingly just a leftist kind of, you know, everything's kind of slipped to the left. There's a real fear about talking about masculinity. It's seen as retrograde. It's seen as atavistic to talk about male strength. But I would love to see, I think we don't need any more the strong silent type insofar as men who can't talk about their emotions. But we also don't want men who cry. Like, so there's a fine line there, isn't there? And likewise, with the female experience, women want to be out of the house working. They want to use their degrees. They want to use their masters. They want to use their professional qualifications. Yeah. But they also want the chance to nurture. And I think that's the next stage in our society, is finding that nuance for both sexes.
I so agree with you. I want to dissect what you gave as an answer. First and foremost, I applaud you as a mother to tell your daughters to pursue an academical career, but don't forget also to create and build your own family, because in the end of the day, that's the only thing that will sustain you. And I projected on myself in the sense that when I was a student, it was really taught to me that having children before the age of 30 was a sort of like a low class thing, because, you know, you're highly educated. Why would you start having a family instead of trying to have a sort of corporate career? And now that I am 30, I'm like, man, I wish I was not so indoctrinated by the left when I was a student. I wish the conservative movement that is now growing was more of a thing during my time, because I would have loved to be a mom by now. On the other hand, when you were saying that every woman wants a man that protects, guides, and provides, I couldn't agree more. What I think is so interesting is that even liberal women are admitting that they want to have a man that does those three things. They just can't find it in other liberal men. So they eventually want to end up with a conservative man. There you go. Point proven. And then you were saying about, I agree with you, because if we talk about feminism, it's either the liberal left, the stereotypical woman with blue hair and a nose piercing, or it is the other extremist, which is the thread wife who has 5 babies and is making sourdough at 5 a.m. in the morning while she has a full glam makeup on, which is also not realistic. Because if you're going to have babies, you're going to be probably exhausted. You're not going to have your makeup and hair always beautifully done. That is not real life. And that is also not applicable to you and me and everyday people that are watching this. And that is the majority. And I do think there's this huge middle ground of women that do desire to live what we both say, a conservative life, pursue their own careers, their self-fulfillment, but also being a mother and finding fulfillment in that. However, the problem is, how do you do it financially in this economy? Because we all know.
I remember when I started going to kind of right-wing conferences, I noticed that there were, sometimes I was the only woman in the room or maybe one of 2 or 3 women, and everyone was a young guy and they all wanted trad wives. And I'm like, sure, go for it. I mean, there'll be a queue of women, as I just said, who want to be provided for. But can they do that? Can they provide a lifestyle on one salary? Can they pay the mortgage? Can they pay for the holidays? So I think that's the crux of it. What we're talking really about is an economic model whereby everything now in society requires 2 incomes. Like in Ireland, we brought our then finance minister brought in tax individualization. And prior to that only came in 2000. Prior to that, it was very common for mothers to only work part-time or to be at home. Also, in terms of our birth rate, we're now at 1.47. But in Ireland, we were at almost 4 up until the late 70s, 3.8 in the early 90s, so early 80s rather. So I feel like in Ireland, it's a very interesting case study because it's only really a generation ago that we were having large families, and that it's entirely down to the economic stresses on families. Yeah. Also, what mother is going to have more than 2 or any children at all if it's this highly stressed lifestyle where they're working full time, they have a commute. So I totally agree with you in terms of the trad wife, unrealistic, idealized, vaguely, I think, oppressive version of this fetishization of kind of motherhood. I don't think that's particularly helpful, but equally, it is true, I think, that for most women who want to have a large family, they want to do that and be at home with them, and I was at home with my children for over a decade and it was blissful, but I was very lucky. I was totally supported by my husband, and also he supported me to do brain work. So I was able to do brain work. I did a master's after my first child. Then I trained as a IBCLC, and then I went back to law and qualified as a barrister. But I was able to do those things while around the family. I wasn't getting up and out every morning. So I suited the family rhythm and I was able to put them first. So that's a tall order, isn't it? To have support, have help, not work, not pay bills, and do brain work. And if you can do all those things, then you're going to have a blissful time at home with your babies. And that costs money. So that goes back to the provider element. Do men want to step up and do that? I don't know if they do, the modern man.
Yeah, I come from a country where a man always demand a woman to pay 50-50. So if you then also want a wife that stays at home and take care of the children and, create a whole warm house and cook you dinner, then it's going to be a bit tough to go 50-50. I agree with you on this.
Do you do 50-50 for dates? So if a guy asked you out and said, let's go for dinner, would then you do 50-50?
So I don't really date to date. I date because I want to find my future husband, and I wouldn't appreciate my future husband wanting to pay for the food. And it's not about the money. It's about, I think there's this kind of chivalry that you want to take a woman out for dinner. That doesn't mean that I take it for granted, because I think this is another big problem that we have now, which is like the Sprinkle movement, where women are like, oh, I want a provider, and they do nothing in return, and they see it almost as a you should provide for me, which I think is also really damaging. But it's a kind of,
you know that guy Scott Galloway, he's like he does lots of podcasts, he lectures in Stern Business School, and he's been on loads of boards in tech. Scott Galloway, have you come across him? So he's quite left, but he says to his sons, always pay for dinner.
Yeah.
Always pay for dinner. And his thesis is that there's far more of a cost to the woman, not only the basic costs of like hair and makeup and clothes, but also that we are the ones who discern. So we choose the mate, and there's a much higher cost if it goes wrong, or if, you know, obviously we bear the burden, the reproductive burden. Like, so he's kind of worked it all out, but even though he's quite left, he thinks, oh, his sons should always pay. And I agree with that. I think that it's just old fashioned chivalry, and it's kind of recognition of the fact that you're, like, it's funny that because I think that's one of the things that feminism has kind of, the damage it's done. Like doors, if someone takes you out for dinner, that's somehow demeaning. Or if they open the door for you, that's somehow demeaning. No, it's chivalry.
This is such a good point, because this was the rhetoric I heard over and over and over again growing up in the Netherlands, that men felt it was almost a compliment that they would give to a woman if she would pay for herself, because that means you appreciate her more because she can take care of herself, which is not the point at all. It's given an open door to being lazy, if you would ask me, to be really honest. You know, Lisa, I really wonder, how do we move on from here? Because I think we have established that if you want to reframe the debate about feminism, we need to put motherhood in it. We talk about early feminists. They really wanted to have women having equal opportunities and equal rights, but within a certain framework wherein they were still a mother, they still would have a family within the church most often. They were very often devoted Catholics. How do we bring that back? Because it took decades to go from that perspective into the woke ideology that we see now, that has radicalized women, has done an enormous impact on our society. How do we move forward reframing that?
Gosh, let me think
I
about
know this is a $1 million question.
One of the things, you know, so much of this is linked to essentially industrialization of the West. And that had such a knock-on effect. You know, Mary Harrington is very good on this, and she would be at the forefront of the kind of conservative feminist movement, or the maternal feminist movement. And she says, you know, once the industrial age happened, the cottage industry ended. So women were able to make some money, but still look after the children at home. But once you're in a factory, you can't really do that. And we're now experiencing the kind of end game of that, where, you know, you have to have two full-time incomes to get a mortgage. And I just think that no one's going to go and live, very few people will go and live off grid in a field. People want a certain lifestyle. So I think one of the things is to find a route back to nature, a route back to our true selves. Even the thing, what I noticed is when I was a IBCLC working on the postnatal ward in St. Mary's, Paddington in London, so often the young mother, well, I say young, often they would be 30, they had never held a newborn in their whole life. That would actually be the norm. And so we need to try and find a way whereby we're around mothering more, because I think that the hormones are there, you know, like there is the, you know, estrogen, progesterone, they are set up and ready to go in our system. They are the nurturing hormones. And I think, you know, it's one of the most beautiful gifts in the world to see your husband fall in love with the baby you've given birth to, and to see siblings and their love develop between them. And this is just the essence of life. This is the purpose of life. You know, everything else is great, and we all like nice things. But really, why are we here? You know, I feel like we're here to, you know, I think having children gives you purpose, because you care about the future more. You know, like some of my advocacy comes from a sense of wanting to protect children, and children, after all, you know, they don't have a voice, they can't consent to whatever, you know, whether that's surrogacy or whatever. But also sometimes it's a sense of legacy or of the future. What sort of country do you want your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren to grow up in? And so without that framework, what is it all about? Is it just about going to the gym and, you know, making money? And I think that's also the reason there's a whole revival of Catholicism globally, which I'm fascinated by and I'm loving. Like for me, I think that's a huge part of it. There's the beauty of Catholicism. It's just such a beautiful spectacle. It's also quite definite, and people want something definite. And I think they see it as a bulwark against all these other kind of expansionist movements globally. But I also think it's about this kind of truth and beauty, seeking truth and beauty. And also I would say, for me, you know, Mary, the veneration of Mary, how central she is in Catholicism, I find that really enriching as a mother, as a woman. There's a real sacredness to how motherhood and womanhood is treated in the Catholic Church. Like I say 3 Hail Marys with my daughters every night, and I think they're so close to source that they're really powerful. And we've had some good results when people were sick, So yeah, I think that if we just tap into our true nature as women, it's all there. And it's about losing the fear that that's somehow retrograde or it somehow oppresses us or demeans us, people blame feminism for everything. I don't blame feminism, but it was called feminism when women were told, even if you enjoy getting the best cut of meat from the butcher and making a really nice casserole, or even if you love making those curtains, or even if you love potty training your children, all that's demeaning. Get out and work and make money for yourself, for your mortgage, for the exchequer as well, for the government, because that's what empowers you. And that was really a psyops. Like they had to tell women that being at home with their babies was beneath them in order to get them out to work.
Well, that's the point because, Leisha, you have built up a quite career for yourself besides having your family, and we're coming towards the end of our interview, but I quickly want to touch upon that because a big argument that I also see from the left, and I think it's important that we address that as well, is that usually they feel that marriages were entrapping women into a very financially vulnerable situation where they couldn't leave their partner when they were abusive or harmful or cheating or any one of those terrible things. And I think therefore it is so important as a woman, you will always have your financial independence. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't surrender to your husband, but it means that if something happens, because none of us is God, we can't predict the future, you can still take care of yourself and your children. You have seen it as well as a barrister yourself. What advice would you have on that?
Yeah, I think that is good advice. I think try and keep something going if you can, even just like part-time while you have your children. But I don't know if it is true that you cede power because you're not making money. It depends on how you view the work of mothering, And I think, like, God, when I had very small children, I used to phone up my husband and I'd be genuinely so excited if I was like weaning them or potty training them and I go, oh my God, she's done a poo, or oh my God, she ate this thing or whatever. And it was so genuine. And because I elevated it naturally, organically, instinctively, emotionally to that level, then he met me there, and he always deferred to me and supported me. So I think, we need those kind of men, those sorts of men to do that. I'm definitely not a surrendered wife in any way. I would say I'm a handful, if anything. And I think we're a good team, but we have definitely got sort of gender roles,
I can keep on talking with you hours for hours. So we definitely need to have you back on the show. I want to end with the last sentence so you can finish it. A conservative feminist is a woman who
leans into motherhood and femininity and protects childhood.
Amen. Leisha, I got goosebumps hearing you talk about motherhood. And yesterday when we were on the phone, you said being a mother is the most fulfilling thing you've ever done in your life. And we need to have more voices like yours to advocate for women, for motherhood. Because I do believe it is the most powerful thing we can achieve as a woman. So I want to finish with that as a message because more than anything, if you're watching this, I really want us to get over that whole debate of left and right when it comes down to femininity and feminism. I have friends who have tattoos and adore Margaret Thatcher. I have women, and most of my friends are high educated, they have a career, they're well driven, and they want to be mothers and wives. You don't have to be one or the other. Don't put yourself in a box. Fulfill whatever makes you happy, whether that is your career or having a family. That is true feminism. So thank you so much for watching. Leisha, thank you for being here. Before we go, where can people follow your work?
So I'm on Twitter as Laoisa De Brún and my organization is called the Countess. So it's at the Countess IE and our website is thecountess.ie. And we've got a YouTube channel called The Countess Conversations.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we have a link in the description. I will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.